So today we're going to be learning Parsha Devarim, living Torah in the real world. And a very important question is asked, why does the Torah need another book? This week we begin Sefer Devarim, the fifth and final book of the Torah. At first glance, it raises a simple question. The Jewish people have already received the Torah. They spent 40 years learning from Moshe Rabbeinu. They have built the Mishkan, received the mitzvot, and experienced every major event of the desert. So why do they need another entire book? If nothing new is happening, why doesn't the Torah simply end with Bamidbar? The answer is that Sefer Devarim is not repeating the Torah. It's actually preparing the Jewish people for a completely different stage of life. The Torah itself isn't changing, but the people are. Everything they have learned until now has taken place in the desert. In a few weeks, they will cross the Jordan River, enter Eretz Yisrael, and begin living a completely different reality. That transition is really the subject of the entire Sefer. Moshe Rabbeinu understands that entering the Eretz Yisrael isn't simply moving to a new location. It's moving into a new way of serving Hashem. And before the people take that step, he gathers them one last time to prepare them for what lies ahead. So what exactly is changing? Why does entering Eretz Yisrael requires an entire new book of the Torah? The greatest difference between the desert and Eretz Yisrael isn't geography. It's the way Hashem's presence is experienced. For 40 years, the Jewish people lived surrounded by open miracles. Every morning, the manna fell from heaven, water came from the Miriam's well, and the clouds of glory protected them and guided them wherever they traveled. They didn't have to worry about planting crops, supporting an economy, or defending a nation. They lived constantly reminding them that Hashem was taking care of them. But that stage is ending. In Eretz Yisrael, they will have to work the land, wait for the rain, earn a living, establish courts, build cities, and create a functioning society. Life will be very different and will begin to look natural. Hashem will still be present, but his presence will be hidden within nature rather than openly revealed through miracles. The Rebbe explains that this is exactly why Sefer Devarim had to be written. The Torah isn't changing. The challenge is changing. The generation of the desert had to learn how to trust Hashem while living with miracles. The generation of entering Eretz Yisrael had to learn how to trust Hashem when life looks ordinary, just like ours. And in many ways, that is our challenge as well. Most of us don't experience open miracles every single day. We wake up, we go to work, we raise children, we pay bills, we deal with many responsibilities, and we navigate an ordinary routine. If we are not careful, life itself can become a distraction. We become so focused on what we are doing that we stop noticing who is actually guiding it all. That's why the Devarim speaks so directly to us. Moshe isn't only preparing the generation entering Eretz Yisrael, he's preparing every generation that will ever have to find Hashem within this natural world. But there's another fascinating change that takes place in Sefer Devarim. Not only does the people reality actually change, but the Torah itself suddenly sounds different. So if the message hasn't changed, why does the style suddenly change so dramatically? Throughout the first 4 books of the Torah, we repeatedly heard the same expression: Hashem spoke to Moshe. Moshe serves as the faithful messenger, transmitting Hashem's words exactly as they were given. Then we arrive at Sefer Devarim, and suddenly the Torah sounds very different. Moshe begins speaking in the first person. The entire book reads like one continuous address to the Jewish people. Why? The Rebbe explains that this doesn't make Devarim any less divine. Every word remains the word of Hashem. What changes, though, is the way the words are communicated. Until now, Moshe transmitted the Torah. Now he explains the Torah. That's why the sages call this book Mishneh Torah. Not because it's the second Torah, but because it's the Torah being reviewed, explained, and internalized before the people begin the next stage of their lives. There's an important lesson here. Learning Torah isn't only about knowing information, but learning Torah has to become part of the way we think. It has to shape the way we make decisions, the way we build our homes, the way we speak, the way we work, and the way we respond to life's challenges. As long as the Torah remains something that we learn but never integrate, it stays outside of us. Moshe's goal is to make sure that doesn't happen. He's teaching the people that Torah is not only meant for the Bet Midrash, but it's actually meant for the vineyard, for the marketplace, for the homes, the farms, the businesses, and every part of regular life. The Torah isn't preparing them to leave spirituality behind. It's actually preparing them to bring spirituality into the world. That also explains another detail that seems almost unnecessary at first, but turns out to be incredibly significant. The Torah tells us that Moshe explained the Torah in 70 languages. Why would that matter? The Torah tells us that Moshe began to explain the Torah, and Rashi comments that he explained in 70 languages. At first, that seems like an interesting detail, but no particular importance. Why does the Torah want us to know how many languages Moshe used? What difference does it make? The Rebbe explains that this isn't just about transition or translation. Moshe wasn't simply making the Torah accessible to more people. He was teaching something fundamental about the purpose of the Torah itself. Until now, the Jewish people had lived in an environment that was almost completely removed from the rest of the world, the desert. The desert was a place of preparation. But once they enter Eretz Yisrael, the mission will be different. They will have to take the holiness they experienced in the desert and bring it into the world. The 70 languages represent the entire world. In other words, the Torah isn't meant to remain confined to one place, one language, or one environment. Its purpose is to elevate every aspect of creation. This is actually a beautiful distinction. Sometimes people think that holiness means separating ourselves from the physical world, but the Torah teaches us that something much deeper. Holiness means entering the physical world and actually transforming it. That's exactly what the Jewish people are about to do. They're leaving the desert not because the desert was no longer holy, but because holiness now has to move into farms, vineyards, courts, homes, businesses, and communities. The mission isn't to escape the world. The mission is actually to reveal Hashem within the world. And I think this is one of the greatest misconceptions people have about Judaism. We often divide life into spiritual and physical. Prayer is spiritual, work is physical. Torah is spiritual, business is physical. But the Torah doesn't see life that way. If we conduct our business honestly, that's Torah. If we speak kindly to our spouse, that's Torah. If we raise our children with Jewish values, that's Torah. If we make a beracha before eating, we have just transformed a physical act into a spiritual one. The goal isn't to leave the world behind. The goal is to bring the Torah into every corner of the world. But accomplishing that requires something else. It's not enough for the Torah to exist outside of us. The Torah has to become part of who we are. So we see that one of the deepest ideas the Rebbe develops here is the difference between learning Torah and internalizing Torah. The Torah itself is objective. Its truth never changes. It isn't different because one generation thinks differently than another. Hashem's wisdom is eternal. But while the Torah never changes, people do. Every generation faces different challenges. Every person has different personalities, different strengths, and different circumstances. The Torah has to be learned in a way that allows each person to understand how that eternal truth applies to his or her own life. And that is exactly what Moshe is doing. He's not changing the Torah. He's helping the people make the Torah their own. This also explains why Sefer Devarim is written in Moshe's own voice. The first 4 books emphasize that the Torah comes directly from Hashem. Devarim teaches us something equally important, that the Torah must also become part of us, not because we reshape the Torah to fit our lives, chas v'shalom, but because we reshape our lives to fit the Torah. When that happens, Torah is no longer just information we know. It becomes the way we think, the way we make decisions, the way we react under pressure, the way we build relationships, the way we understand success and failure, and the way we look at the world. That's why Devarim isn't introducing new mitzvot as much as it's teaching a new relationship with the mitzvot. Moshe knows that once he's gone, the Jewish people won't be able to depend on him to answer every question. So the Torah itself has to become their guide. It has to live inside of them. And I think that's true for all learning. There's a difference between hearing a beautiful class, and there's something very different about allowing that class to change the way you live. We all enjoy inspiration, but inspiration with time actually fades. Transformation, that lasts. That's what Moshe wants for his generation. Not simply that they remember what they learned in the desert, but that they become people who naturally think through the lens of the Torah. So if that is the goal, then Moshe has one final responsibility before the people enter the land. He has to help them learn from their past. And that's why Sefer Devarim begins not with praise, but with a rebuke. Why does Moshe begin with a rebuke? If Moshe's goal is to prepare the Jewish people for their life in Eretz Yisrael, it makes sense that he will review the Torah one last time. What seems surprising, however, is where he begins. Instead of starting with encouragements or blessings, Moshe begins by reminding the people of their failures throughout the 40 years in the desert. At first, that seems like an unusual way to prepare a nation that is about to fulfill the dream of generations. Why revisit painful memories just as they are about to enter the promised land? The answer is that Moshe isn't interested in dwelling on the past. He's interested in making sure that the past becomes a teacher rather than a burden. One of the greatest mistakes we can make is assuming that experience automatically produces wisdom. It doesn't. Experience only becomes wisdom when we take the time to reflect on it, understand it, and allow it to make a change in us. The generation standing before Moshe is about to begin a completely new chapter, but if they don't understand what caused the failures of the previous 40 years, they are in danger of repeating them again. So the Rebbe points out that this is also the deeper meaning of Teshuvah throughout Sefer Devarim. We often think of Teshuvah as repairing a sin, but Teshuvah is much broader than that. It's the ability to step back, honestly, evaluate where we are, and realign ourselves with our purpose. In other words, Teshuvah is not simply about correcting the past. It's about making sure that the future looks different because we have learned from the past. That is why Devarim becomes known as the book of Teshuvah. Moshe understands that once the Jewish people enter a world where Hashem's presence is hidden within nature, they will inevitably lose perspective from time to time. There will be moments when success will make them feel self-sufficient, moments when challenges will make them lose faith, and moments when they will forget the lessons they have learned in the desert. So before they even enter the land, Moshe teaches them that Judaism is built on the ability to return. A Jew is never defined by where he fell, but by his willingness to get up, get back up, and continue walking. What's remarkable is that Moshe not only teaches the people that they needed a rebuke, he also teaches them how rebuke should be given. The method itself becomes part of the lesson. A rebuke needs to be given without humiliation. So the Torah opens the parsha by listing a series of places where Moshe addresses the Jewish people. And Rashi famously explains that these are not simply geographical locations. Each place is an allusion to one of the mistakes the people made during their journey throughout the desert. Instead of mentioning their sins directly, Moshe refers to them through hints. Why? Because Moshe wanted the people to recognize their mistakes without publicly embarrassing them. The goal of the rebuke is not to make someone feel ashamed. The goal is to help someone grow. Once a person's dignity is stripped away, it becomes much harder for that person to hear the message. So instead of focusing on what needs to change, they become focused on defending themselves. So the Rebbe adds another beautiful insight. The names of these places don't only remind the people of their sins they committed, they also remind them of the difficult circumstances surrounding those sins. When they complained, they were traveling through a harsh and frightening wilderness. When they panicked after the report of the spies, they were facing a future that genuinely intimidated them. Moshe does not excuse their actions, but neither does he ignore the reality in which those actions took place. I think this is teaching us an incredibly important lesson about the way we look at other people. Torah never asks us to lower our standards, but it does ask us to deepen our understanding. We can hold people accountable while still recognizing that everyone carries struggles we may never fully see or understand. So comparison does not weaken the truth. It makes truth possible to hear. This also explains why Moshe Rabbeinu waited until the very end of his life to deliver this rebuke. Rashi explains that he did not want the people to feel constantly criticized every time they saw him. His relationship with them was built on love, guidance, and trust. Only once they knew, beyond any doubt, that every word came from a genuine care could they truly hear what he had to say. Perhaps that's one of the greatest lessons in leadership, that before people are willing to receive our criticism, they need to know they have already received our love. When correction comes from frustration, people become defensive. When it comes from genuine concern for another person's growth, it has the power to actually transform us. This entire discussion brings us back to the central message of Sefer Devarim. Why is Moshe taking the time to explain the Torah all over again? Because the Jewish people are no longer preparing to live in the desert. They are preparing to build a Torah life in the real world, and that requires one final shift in perspective before they enter the land. One of the verses the Rebbe highlights seems almost surprising. Hashem tells the Jewish people, "You have stayed long enough at this mountain." At first, that sounds almost impossible to understand. This is Har Sinai. This is where the Torah was given. This is where the Jewish people experienced one of the greatest revelations in history. How could anyone spend too much time at Har Sinai? The answer is not that there is such a thing as too much Torah or too much holiness. Rather, there's a time to receive, but then there's a time to apply. Har Sinai was never meant to be the final destination. It was meant to prepare the Jewish people for the mission that awaited them. If they remain at the mountain forever, they will never accomplish the very purpose for which the Torah was given in the first place. And this is an important shift in the way we think about spirituality. Sometimes we imagine that the holiest life is one that is removed from the world, a life spent only learning, praying, and experiencing moments of inspiration. While those moments are essential, the Torah teaches us that they are only the beginning. The true measure of spiritual growth is not what happens at Har Sinai, but the true measure is what happens after we leave Har Sinai. I think that every one of us has experienced this. We attend an inspiring class, a meaningful Shabbat, or an uplifting Yom Tov, and we leave feeling motivated. The inspiration is real. But eventually the class ends, Shabbat ends, and Yom Tov does too. We return to work, our homes, our families, and the many responsibilities. The question is no longer, was I inspired? The question becomes, what did I bring home with me? And that is exactly what Hashem is telling the Jewish people. Don't mistake preparation for mission itself. The purpose of receiving the Torah is not simply to stand at Sinai. The purpose is to carry Sinai into every area of life, every conversation, business decision, relationship, every challenge becomes an opportunity to reveal the Torah we receive on Mount Sinai. Seen this way, entering Eretz Yisrael is not leaving holiness behind. It's taking holiness into a place where it can transform the world. The desert taught the Jewish people how to live with Hashem when His presence was obvious. Eretz Yisrael will teach them how to reveal His presence when He was hidden. That idea also helps explain one final detail of the opening of Sefer Devarim that can easily be overlooked. But the Rebbe shows that it contains a powerful message about how a Jew is meant to view both the present and the future. The Torah opens by describing where the Jewish people are standing. It says, on the other side of the Jordan. On a simple level, it's telling us that the geographical location. They have not yet entered Eretz Yisrael. They're still on the eastern side of the Jordan River. But the Rebbe points out something fascinating. The Torah is written from the perspective of Eretz Yisrael. He calls their location the other side, because the land of Israel is treated as the point of reference. Even before the Jewish people crossed the river, the Torah already viewed the land as their true place. There is a profound lesson in that. Where a person is physically isn't always where they truly belong. A Jew is always meant to define himself by the destination, not merely by the present moment. This idea speaks not only about the Jewish people's entry into Eretz Yisrael, but also about Jewish history as a whole. We still live in a world that is incomplete. We still experience exile, challenges, and the reality in which Hashem's presence often feels hidden. Yet, the Torah teaches us not to define ourselves by exile. Our perspective should always be fixed on redemption. That doesn't mean ignoring the world we live in. The Jewish people didn't camp by the Jordan, pretending that they had already crossed. They prepared, they organized themselves, and they got ready to enter. But everything they did was with the awareness of where they were going. I think that that's an incredible practical lesson for us. Every one of us has moments when we feel stuck. Sometimes we define ourselves by our current struggles or failures or the chapter of the life that we're living or through the place where we find ourselves right now. The Torah reminds us that our present location is not our identity. Our identity is found in the direction we're moving. Like my husband always says, it's not the location, but is the direction. The Jewish people were not simply a nation standing on one side of the Jordan. They were a nation about to enter the land. In the same way, we are not simple people living through the challenges of today. We're people moving towards a world that Hashem ultimately wants us to build. So when we put all of these ideas together, we begin to see that Sefer Devarim is much more than Moshe's farewell speech. It is actually his blueprint for living a Torah life after the miracles have ended and the real life and the real work begins. As we step back and look at the entire Sefer, we can now answer the question we asked at the very beginning of this class. Why did the Torah need another book? If the Jewish people had already received the Torah at Har Sinai, why spend an entire Sefer reviewing it? Because Moshe understood that there is a tremendous difference between receiving the Torah and living the Torah. The generation standing before him was not preparing to witness another revelation. They were preparing to build their homes, raise their families, establish courts, work the land, and create a Jewish society. In other words, they were about to discover whether everything they had learned over the past 40 years had truly become part of who they were. That's why Devarim doesn't introduce a new Torah. It teaches the people how to carry the Torah they already have into a world where Hashem's presence will no longer be obvious. The miracle of the deserts were never the destination, they were only the preparation. And I think this changes the way we define spiritual success. Many people assume that holiness and the holiest moments in life are the extraordinary ones. Yom Kippur, a powerful gathering, an inspiring class, a meaningful trip to Eretz Yisrael, or a moment of deep prayer. Those moments are actually incredibly important, but Judaism teaches us that they are not the goal. They are meant to give us the strength to live differently afterwards. So the real question isn't what happens while we are inspired. The real question is what happens on an ordinary, regular day of the week when nobody's watching us. Do we still choose honesty? When we're under pressure, do we still choose patience? When life doesn't go according to our plan, do we still recognize that it's Hashem's hands? When we're successful, do we remember where the blessing actually came from? That is the Torah of Devarim. The Rebbe teaches us that Hashem's ultimate desire is not to remain revealed only through miracles. His desire is that we reveal Him within the natural world. That's why Eretz Yisrael represents a higher stage than the desert. The challenge is greater because the partnership is actually greater. Hashem asks us to uncover the holiness that already exists beneath the surface of everyday life. I also think this explains why Devarim is always read before Tisha B'Av. Tisha B'Av reminds us that what happens when our relationship with Hashem weakens. But Devarim reminds us that the relationship can always be rebuilt. Moshe's rebuke isn't the voice of someone giving up on his people. It's actually the voice of a leader who believes in them enough to prepare them for the future. Every criticism, every reminder, every review of the past is really an expression of hope. If Moshe is teaching them, it's because he believes they can become better than they were yesterday. Perhaps that's the message we should carry with us this week. Every one of us had our own desert moments, times when Hashem felt close, when faith came easily, when we felt inspired and spiritually alive. But life doesn't remain in the desert. Eventually, we all enter our own Eretz Yisrael. We return to work, to family, to responsibility, and to ordinary life. The question is whether we leave the Torah behind at Sinai or whether we carry Har Sinai with us. Are we able to bring holiness into the way we speak, into our conversations? Are we able to bring honesty into our business? Are we able to be kind in our home? Are we able to bring the Torah into the decisions we make every single day? Because that is actually the real mission. The goal was never simply to receive the Torah and that's it. The goal is not to just learn the Torah. The goal was to become people whose lives reflect the Torah. That is the journey Moshe Rabbeinu begins in Sefer Devarim. And perhaps that's why the book speaks so powerful to us today. We too live in a world that looks ordinary. We don't wake up with the manna, we don't see the clouds of glory, and we don't stand each morning at the foot of Mount Sinai. Yet Moshe reminds us that Hashem is not less present today than he was then. The difference is that today he asks us to find him. That is the challenge of Sefer Devarim, and that is also its promise. If we learn to recognize Hashem not only in miraculous ways, but in our ordinary, natural life, if we learn to bring the Torah into every part of our lives, then we're doing exactly what Moshe was preparing the Jewish people to do as they stood on the banks of the Jordan River, ready to enter the land. That is what it means to truly live with the Torah. Shabbat Shalom.